All right, so welcome back, everybody. We're gonna go ahead and get started with Tim. Tim, I'm gonna read a little spiel
Mhm.
explaining today, and we'll dive right into it. So, welcome, Tim and CD3 voters. This afternoon, we will interview 3 candidates for 45 minutes each. Several of us have developed the questions. If the audience has additional ones, please drop them in the chat box for the moderators, and we'll get to them if we can. As we discussed in the previous interview, we will send questions that did not get answered to the candidate so they can get back to us and the chairs can disseminate them. A little introduction. My name is Katie Stewart. I sit on the executive committee of the La Plata County Dems. I was asked to moderate this meeting by multiple chairs because I'm currently an uncontested candidate for the CD3 Central Committee as the chair. So there's a little bit about me, and we're gonna dive into our 7 fairly in-depth questions. And we ask that, Tim, that you be concise and specific in your answers so we don't have to cut you off. But no, we will move along if necessary because we want to get to all the issues. Our 8th question is specific to you. And if we have time, we'll take additional questions from the attendees from the chat box, but we plan to conclude the interview 45 minutes from when we start. So I'm going to give you about a minute or so to introduce yourself, and we'll head into question number 1.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, Katie, for hosting, and to all the CD3 Dems for participating in this great forum. I think it's really exciting that we can do things like this now virtually, and hope that we'll have a chance to do more of that. My name is Tim Kubik. I'm coming to you from a very snowy Larimer County, although not so much as some of you, as I understand. I've been a volunteer like all of you for 15 years with our party, knocked I don't know how many doors, at least 10,000 over the course of the years, sent hundreds of thousands of texts, made lots of phone calls. And I'm running for chair because I appreciate the work of our volunteers and the fact that they win elections for us. I think we need to do 3 things. We need to organize better as a state party so that we make it easier for you to do the hard work of voter contact. That means cleaning up communications, working with my friend Jared Munger there, as I suspect the operations vice chair. And it means making sure that we support you rather than tell you what to do. I also believe voter education is really important, and that we should do it like teachers at their best, which is talking to voters, find out what they're concerned about, and help them answer the questions with what we know. And the last thing I'm concerned about is engagement. We've got 15% of Democrats who have disaffiliated in the last 10 years. We need to bring those folks back into the party. And the only way to do that is for the party to come out and engage with you directly. And I pledge that by the end of June, I will visit every county party for an executive meeting as part of my commitment to engagement, and make sure the CDP is engaged with you in cycle and out of cycle. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
All right, thank you, Tim. So question number 1, describe what you believe to be the 2 most important challenges facing the CDP and your plans to overcome them.
Okay. Well, I think I mentioned it too in my opening remarks. I'm very concerned about our voter disaffiliation rate. We can't continue to have the engaged volunteers that we need if we are losing people affiliating from the Democratic Party. And of the 110 people that I had volunteering for me as a regional organizer in Berthoud, I can count about 10 left who are active, and probably 25 to 30 who have disaffiliated from the party. I think part of that, if you look at national research that applies to Colorado also, is that our voters are disaffiliating to the left. That means we have to find a way to bring them back into the party. And I think part of that begins with deep canvassing and finding out why they've disaffiliated. I think organization is the other top challenge. I think I know that most of you have banged your heads against things with CDP on them numerous times over the course of just the last cycle. And I don't think that's fair to ask volunteers who are putting thousands of hours a year in to have to deal with the same problems with VAN, or problems with our finance reporting, or problems with our communications flow. So those are 2 things that I would want to tackle very early on over the summer.
All right. Question number 2, describe 1 major fundraising campaign that you personally managed, including for what entity, your strategies to meet the objectives, and the approximate net amount raised. And what is the biggest challenge to fundraising for CDP? So that's multi-pronged, but Jared has it up there.
So I would say the biggest fundraising campaign that I was involved in when I was the campaign manager for the House District 49 race that I helped run 10 years ago, when we thought the Obama impact would help us pick up that seat, which was a minus 17 deficit. And that challenge came in two folds. One is that donors were very leery of donating when they didn't think there was much of a chance to win. And two, that the House Majority Project kept moving the needle on what we needed to raise. We were told that if we could raise $15,000, they would match that and support the campaign. And that was to be done in the first quarter. We did that in the first quarter, raising $5,000 in a quiet campaign first, and then another $10,000 after the candidate was out publicly completely. I think the biggest challenge that we faced was that challenge of how do we convince people to contribute money to a candidate who has long odds. We were able to do that with the first 15 in the first quarter. We did it. And then CDP told us, well, that's not enough. You got to raise another 15. Second time around, we raised 10. By the end of the campaign, we'd raised close to $40,000, which was a record in HD 49. It still wasn't enough. Some help from the state party would have been wonderful. Even some small help could have made a big difference in terms of encouraging donors that the state party believed in this race, and so they should also.
Thank you, Tim. Sorry, my 6-year-old lost a tooth and he had to show me.
That's okay. My dogs will start barking at some point here. Don't worry. So,
okay. All right. So question number 3, what role do you believe county parties play in the organizational structure of the CDP, particularly those in CD3, and how would you expand dialogue, improve communication, and facilitate collaboration with them?
all right. So the county parties are where the rubber meets the road. The role of the CDP is to support that work financially with staff and with other volunteers that we can channel into a district like CD3. I live right across from the Boulder line. And one of the things that I most admire about Boulder is that they spend more time volunteering and canvassing in Larimer County and in Weld County than they do in Boulder. All they have to do is send out their voter guides, and Boulder voters generally turn out to vote. I do think the dialogue is important, though, and I'm a big fan of a motto from improv comedy that says, bring a brick and not a cathedral. You asked me to write up some objectives, and I did because that's what you asked, but I see them as a brick as part of building a cathedral together. If I talk about adding regional organizers to different parts of the state, not by CD, but by actual communities of interest, I want to have that conversation with the chairs of that region and formulate a job description that works for them and have them have a say in how the organizers do that work, even though they're paid by CDP and will be evaluated by me. I also think we need to facilitate collaboration by encouraging county parties that face similar circumstances to form sister relationships and sort of like a sister cities program. I know that El Paso and Weld County, for example, face many similar challenges, and rather than each fighting it alone, they could gain much from collaborating. I think the same thing is true with the regions in CD3, whether it's the Western Slope, the Valley, or out on the Southeastern Plains. There's an important role that collaborating between you plays in winning elections. And I think it's very important that we are in the loop on that rather than dictating that decision-making in terms of how your regions work to win CD3.
Thank you. All right, question 4, which you've touched on a little bit. The CDP typically funds paid regional organizers the last 6 months or so before an election. Do you support this strategy? Why or why not? If not, what would your strategy be and why?
No, I don't really support that strategy for a couple of reasons. One, I honestly believe that paid regional organizers should be a year-round presence in key regions, as I said, worked out with the county party chairs. I know from my experience working with regional organizers in the coordinated campaign, it takes them 6 weeks to 2 months to get up to speed with the ground that they're on. And ideally, I would recruit the paid regional organizers from the regions that they will be working in so that we don't have to deal with that hump. I also think that a paid regional organizer with CDP provides an important communications channel between the various counties and the state party. I know Morgan gets something like 600 emails a day, and that's really an unsustainable amount of information for the chair to handle. If that's coming through the regional organizers, they can handle some of it based on the job descriptions that we work out for them together, and then they can pass along the more crucial things to the state party to try to figure out how we might best be able to help. I think that the presence of regional organizers year-round sends two important messages. One, it tells the counties all over the state that we value them. And I want to be clear that I'm not talking about sending regional organizers to CD1 or CD2, and there's no need for that. Two, I think that beyond that presence, they can help take some of the load off of you as county party chairs at times when you're working on things like caucus and assembly or other county party issues that you need to do, planning a county party dinner, et cetera. They can keep your volunteers going in a way that may take some stress off of you. And I think that long-term relationship will be very, very important, not only to winning in CD3, but to growing sustainable Democratic Party communities in parts of the state where they feel that they're overlooked by the state. So I think that regional organizers need to be a year-round position. They need to be paid at least 50% by CDP, possibly more, depending on how much money that we can raise. Contributions from the county parties would certainly be welcome. I think that pretty much covers it.
All right, thank you. Our fifth question. Given the constraints of campaign finance laws, how can the House Majority Project, the coordinated campaign, and county parties more effectively work together for volunteer deployment in CD3?
Okay. Just making a note so I know what you were asking me. So let's talk about the first and most significant finance law that we have to deal with as a party, and that is the maximum contribution limit to giving to the party as a whole that exists in Colorado. I believe it's $4,025 per individual, and that means if you give $2,000 to the state party, you can only give $2,025 to the county party or to initiatives or anything else. That makes the job of the chair and fundraising very, very important. And I believe very firmly that fundraising should be the job of the entire CDP executive committee, not just a chair and not just a finance committee, because we all have many different networks and we can raise more money if we work together. In terms of working with the coordinated campaign, I do think the regional organizers will help. I don't honestly believe we're going to get a lot of state help in the future. I know that both of my opponents have strong ties to DC and swear they would be able to pull the strings. But as I do some fundraising calls to raise money for my campaign as a way of demonstrating that I can do that, I'm finding a lot of people literally laughing at me asking for money for Colorado. They're like, Colorado, you guys are blue. You don't need any help. So I think we're not going to get money. I think we also may not get as much outside talent. And it's really up to the state party and the county parties to grow the talent that is going to do that coordinated work within the regions in order to make logical volunteer deployment choices. I also want to say that I'm a big fan of the book Dirt Road Revival, which Dennis Abdusby turned me on to last year. I think it's really important that we stop just targeting the known universe during this cycle of voting Democrats. I think we need to be having volunteers getting out and doing deep canvassing and learning more about the people who aren't turning out to vote, learning more about the people who are disaffiliating, so that our outreach effort provides input that informs our messaging. I know you've got some great county chairs out in CD3 who know the ground really, really well. And so it's important that whatever we send out there to help you is somebody who comes to walk alongside you and not tell you what to do.
So in follow-up to that, could you narrow in a bit on how we could coordinate the different campaigns together for volunteer deployment?
Well, one of the things I'm very interested in is doing some landscape analysis to find out what your volunteer capacity is in every county, what you think it is at peak, what you think it is in off cycle. So we have some realistic numbers about the volunteer energy. I honestly think that's a reason that we lost CD3 is that no one at the state party really understood the energy that you had this past cycle in CD3, and we couldn't use that as a metric. And in general, I'd like to do some research and produce some broader metrics about how we decide where to invest money and volunteer targeting before we work out a very clear plan. But I do know one thing from my time working on the coordinated campaign and then working on House district races and school board races locally, is that whenever a coordinated campaign is around, it sucks volunteers. It pulls away from your strength. And so that's why my vision for the regional organizers is more a year-round sustainable operation that may help push volunteers both ways to the campaign and also to you in order to maximize your volunteer capability.
Thank you. Sorry, I squeezed in a little extra one.
That's okay. That's okay.
So I believe we're on question 6.
Yeah, that's right.
That's where you are too. All right. The state central and executive committee meetings have been virtual for the last few years. Would you continue that practice? Why or why not?
Um, yes, I would continue that practice. I honestly think that hybrid meetings, even though they're difficult to coordinate, are the way we need to proceed in the future. And I believe that for a couple of reasons. One, we know there's a value in getting together. When we gather as Democrats in one place, as we will on April 1st, there's sort of a feeling that comes out of that that is very powerful that we take back to our counties. However, it's a big ask for a lot of people, not only those of you who are on the far side of the state, when we usually hold our meetings on the Front Range, but it's a big ask for working people. It's a big ask for people with disabilities to have to come in order to participate. And I know from talking to my good friend Chandra Wilkins, who faces a lot of immune disorders, and she lives in El Paso County, it's a real question of life and death, whether we only do in person or whether we allow a virtual option. So I would favor proceeding forward on a hybrid option. I don't think there's any place in the future, given the party's finances, that we could provide stipends for those who come from a long way away. But I wouldn't rule out the possibility of that for those of you who want to make the trek, assuming that fundraising can be more successful than it has been in the last few years.
All right, thank you. We will move on to question number 7. What are your thoughts about caucus and assembly as a method of ballot access? What alternatives do you believe Colorado could pursue? And having read the article by Theory in the Colorado Sun, what elements appeal to you, if any, and why? And are you aware that 5 chairs in 2022 quit before caucus and assembly?
I was not aware of that quitting, but I've heard many chairs on the North Front Range express that same frustration. I'd like to say a few things. The first off is that I think that right to gather in assembly is a fundamental right guaranteed to us in the Constitution. And as I mentioned earlier, when we gather together, we feel stronger and we take that energy back home. I think that happens at caucus also, and I would hate to lose that. But we've basically gutted the purpose of caucus by adding a primary to our election process. A lot of voters only like to come out to caucus when they have a chance to talk about a presidential race. And most of us have been doing this for a while and know there's a big difference between a year when we have a presidential race and a year when we don't. But having put the primary in place, caucus turnout, at least in Northern Colorado, has been significantly lower, and I suspect in many other places, because people know the only reason they're coming out is to get voluntold to be a precinct organizer or an election judge. And so turnout is a little bit less scarce. I'm concerned about Ken Thierry's approach to caucus on 2 levels. One is that I think while he's right, that caucus tends to discriminate and favor an older, whiter population. I don't think it necessarily has to be that way. I think there are ways that we as a party can pull more people in. I'm also very concerned that if the petitioning process is set to too high of a level, that will basically box out a lot of those we actively recruit to join the party, including young people, people of color, and working class folks. If the petition level is too low, then if you think you've got problems now voting for who's going to win a district or serve as a congressional candidate, imagine what it's like if 23 or 40 people can get on the ballot, and you just have to talk to people in Denver right now about that to know what a nightmare that is. I think we did a CARC commission a few years ago, a Caucus and Assembly Reform Commission inside the party. And I think there were some interesting alternatives that were proposed in that commission that we haven't really fully explored. And I'd like to do that before we talk about canceling caucus and assembly completely. Some of those included combining caucus and assembly in one event. So chairs don't need to worry about finding lots of schools or public facilities that they can hold caucuses. They could just do that in the morning and then do their assembly in the afternoon. That makes for a longer day, however, and many not enjoy that. I also think in the report of the CART Commission, there was some discussion about having more virtual caucuses that were open for several days, where people could participate in forums that were set up rather than in person, exchanging their ideas about different things, volunteering for positions. And I think that might be worth exploring as well, not only for rural areas, but honestly for urban areas as well. So my ultimate decision on this is that I think it's very important that we gather together to talk politics with each other. I think we have to look at the CARC proposals as a way to reduce the impact on county party chairs, both in terms of the time it takes and also the dime it takes to pay for the caucuses.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to move into your Tim specific question, and then it looks like we have plenty of time
Sure.
for questions from the floor. So here is your last question that we had prepared in advance. In what ways do you see CD3 as similar to and different from other congressional districts in terms of messaging, organizing, and field strategies? Please be as specific as possible.
Okay. Well, first off, we have to admit that CD3 is huge. It really is 3 different regions of our state lumped into one district. And that means there really need to be sort of 3 different campaign strategies in different parts. The South and Southwest, the Western Slope, and the eastern portions going up to Pueblo are all very different communities of interest. And that's why I say I'm not thinking about deploying regional organizers by congressional district, but actually by different communities of interest and regions in the state. I would imagine ideally 3 different organizers in CD3 to match that. In terms of messaging, I think it's important to acknowledge that the state party plays a key role in articulating the core values of the party, and that the candidates who are running in different districts have a right to reach to their constituents and message in a way that is important for them. I know this means that a lot of people get nervous that what the people say in Denver may be hard for you to deal with in CD3 or in Weld County, or vice versa. What Democratic candidates say in Weld County may be very difficult for Democrats in the Denver-Boulder corridor to swallow. But I think it's really important that we allow that distinction of messaging so that people can reach and represent their own constituents. I just want to mention the 5 things that I think are our core values. I won't go into detail. We can talk about those later. But I think equality, elections, education, environment, and employment are things that we stand for as a party. And the party chair needs to trumpet those loud and clear all year long, so that we can understand that this is what the party stands for. Candidates may take slightly different positions, but if they embrace those core values, they're welcome to the party. In terms of field strategy, I think it goes back to what I was saying about metrics for understanding the ground. I know from having to canvass in both urban areas and rural areas in Colorado, that it is simply not possible to knock doors when everyone lives on 3 or 30 acre properties, let alone 300 or 3,000 acre properties. The strategies that we recommend in our precinct organizer guide are very, very difficult. There is no gathering place in my precinct. There's no bar, there's no restaurant, there's no public building except a school. Everything has to happen in people's houses. And that means that house parties play a lot more of an important role in terms of canvassing and voter contact in rural areas than do door-to-door canvassing campaigns, which can be much more efficient when you've got everybody living on a quarter acre or less. I also think in terms of volunteer deployment and targeting, that it's important that we understand that the challenge of doing the work is much more difficult for the volunteers. The statistics that the coordinated campaign and most campaigns use in terms of what is a reasonable expectation for voters to contact in an hour or a 2-hour shift are completely unreasonable when you're talking to voters who are living in more rural communities. And we need to be sure to not only think about revising those metrics for contact, but also thinking about how we can help people in terms of thinking about pairs of canvassers rather than single canvassers with one person doing the driving, or bike canvassing. When I canvassed for Bill Richardson in Iowa, it was 30 below. And so we went with drivers, one person driving and one person canvassing, because it was great to come back into a warm car rather than have to walk to the next house on the target list. The last thing I'll say about what makes CD3 unique is that we know the votes are there. You all knew that last fall. The question is, how do we convince people to come out of the woodwork to do that voting? Many of you have a lot of strategies that have worked in parts of your counties. I'm sure you're sharing them already. You don't need me to tell you how to do that. What you need is some support from the state party, whether it's financial, whether it's resources like text programs, which we used at the DEI to sort of flush quail, if you will. We sent over 75,000 texts in 8 races and flushed out all the people who told us to F off on text messages. And we shared that data with the candidates and said, you probably don't need to bother talking to them as you're going around and trying to get out the vote. Candidates were also very, very happy to see the people who said, oh yeah, I'm voting for so-and-so. And they could just leave a note on their door and say, thanks for your vote if they couldn't find them there. So I think there are a lot of different strategies that we can use to effectively cover rural territory, and acknowledge that CD3 is a very different population compared to even CD4, which is largely rural, but has the advantage of being a lot easier to drive around because all the roads are square and go straight. It's a little harder when you're trying to deal with mountain valleys and windy roads. And I have candidates in Estes Park at altitude. That's way more exhausting than you would think, right? Knocking doors at 8,000 feet, going up a mountain, like the map looks flat, but it's not, right? So we need to acknowledge that those differences are there and respect the effort that volunteers put in to contact voters, no matter what methods you as county chairs find are most effective.
Thank you, Tim, for answering that first round of questions. So we've had some come in from the attendees, and I'll give them to you as time permits because we want to give you a few minutes at the end to give some closing remarks.
Sure.
So here is the first question we have. In your first objective, you state that you'll develop metrics for the evaluation of CDP officers and staff, including the chair. What role, if any, do you see county party chairs playing in the development of the metrics and evaluation of the state party chair?
That's a great question. And it's an example of the bring a brick and not a cathedral mantra that I love, right? What I gave for you is an idea that we need to have better metrics, but I think there's a lot of need for input before execution of that plan. And I think county party chairs should have a voice in what the metrics are. I know that many of the county party chairs that I've talked to in rural areas just want the chair to be visible, to show up, and not just for a parade necessarily, but to show up and help out. I know that fundraising is important, but I think the county party chairs would have a right to evaluate on whether the chair can raise money, not just to give to HMP and DSCF, or not just to run the targeted races in the state, but also money that can help build sustainable communities in different parts of the state that are on the trajectory that the south end of Larimer County, where I live, was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were minus 17 district in HD 49 and 15. This year, HD 49 is like a +8 district, and Senate District 15 is a 50-50 district. And we fought like heck to win that district for my friend Janice Marchman. So I think it is really important that the county party chairs have some input in how the state party is evaluated, but I don't want to make that a burdensome task for everybody. I would prefer to do it by sending out a survey and asking for different ideas that people have and collecting that, rather than trying to convene large Zoom meetings with everybody on that will waste lots of our time debating and talking about things. So that you have input. We propose a draft based on that input. We send it out to all of you, and then you can send your comments and corrections back.
Okay, thank you. All right, our next question. In order to achieve your goals, you will need CDP staff who already have full-time jobs. How will you reprioritize and or hire new staff to achieve your objectives?
Okay. So as an educational coach for years, I've relied on a process that's called appreciative inquiry, which is about finding out what people think they do best about their job, what they like about it, what they dream that they could be able to do, and then working together to design some possibilities that will allow them to achieve that, and also allow them the opportunity to say, I'm being asked to do this, and it's not really in my wheelhouse, right? Karen, I think, has 5 jobs, if we're honest. And we need to take some of those things off of her plate so she can excel at being an executive director. So in April, I plan on doing one-on-one sit-down meetings with all of the staff and also all of the new executive committee members, and do that appreciative inquiry process with them in order to get a better sense of what additional staff that we need. But I do anticipate a few things that we need pretty quickly. We need somebody besides Will to handle financial compliance and accounting. We really need an accounting department, and we need to find some part-time accountants who would be willing to put in some work part-time, paid staff, especially at crunch times when the money comes in like crazy and everything that we miss by more than a week or a day, in some cases late in the cycle, results in a fine that we have to pay, and that's money that we really shouldn't have to pay out. I also think we need a communications director and possibly a small communications team. But as we talk about that, every person that we're talking about is at least a $55,000 to $75,000 budget item in terms of salary and benefits. Even the part-time people are going to need a salary for the work that they do on accounting. So that means we're going to have to raise a fair amount of money in order to expand the staff. But ultimately, I want to make clear that I don't have a vision for what my ideal staff would be. I like the staff that are there and I want to work with them, and I want to work with them to determine what they think the staff needs are, and also to have some input from you all in terms of where you think the most critical needs are.
All right. Thank you. So we have lots of questions and we'll go for as long as we can.
Yeah, that's fine.
Great. So Carl Young from Archuleta asked, in 2026, all statewide seats will be up and our incumbents will be term limited. How will you go about recruiting and replacement of the candidates?
I don't think there's going to be any problem recruiting. I think there's a line out the door for almost every seat. And I think the bigger challenge that we're going to face, unlike this last cycle, is that there's going to be a lot of division within our party of who it is, should it be the successor in the governor's office, the successor in the secretary of state's office, et cetera. I know right now 4 people who are already talking about running for governor. So I don't think we're going to have any problem finding somebody who wants to run, but we are going to have some pretty contested caucus and assembly process or primary process, however we end up doing it by 26, that will be the responsibility of the state party chair to manage fairly. And I want to be really clear that I believe that primaries are a good thing for the Democratic Party, and I don't believe that any candidate who can't survive a primary has any business being in the job in the first place. So I think it's crucial that the state party and the state party chair not select the winners. That's the job of the voters in our districts and statewide to do, whether that's through assemblies or whether that's on election day or primary day. In terms of managing that, I think part of that is going to be to start developing good relations early on with the people who are interested in filling those offices. There's going to be a lot of shuffling going on. There's no doubt about it. But I think we'll see a lot of familiar faces shuffling into new positions as a result of those vacancies. The last thing I want to say about that is 26 is not just, term limits. It's the end of an era in Colorado politics, right? Jared Polis has been a fixture in Colorado politics for 20 years since he ran for the State Board of Education. And he has helped the party and to build a network of organizations around the party that make it very, very sustainable. I don't think anybody's going to be surprised where Jared will probably want to go next and run for president at some point, whether it's in 24 if Biden doesn't run, or whether it's in 28. But that's going to have a big impact in the way Colorado is used to doing politics, because we've become very reliant on Jared and his networks of candidates, his networks of organizations to be successful in the state. And I think that's something that needs to be a direct conversation with the governor after midterm, basically. So after 24, we need to start having some conversations about what's going to happen next with the state. Many of those organizations will persist, but I'm quite conscious of the fact that if Jared sort of leaves and doesn't keep a close hand on them, there's going to be a struggle for control of New Era, Colorado Immigrants' Rights Coalition, Progress Now, a variety of organizations that do great work for us outside the scope of the party, as well as a struggle for votes inside of the party. And I think we have to be very, very conscious that that's something that we face over the next 3 to 6 years, probably.
Thank you. So Larry Patrick out of Warfano asked, the Colorado Republicans have all 5 of their candidates for state chair being election deniers. How would you, as CDP chair, handle the likely misinformation being pushed by them in 2024?
A good one. As I said earlier, I think the chair needs to be a more visible force. Christy Burton Brown was far more visible than Morgan was on the news, newspapers, social media, radio, that kind of stuff. And that helped perpetuate the big lie, right? Because we weren't really out there putting a strong message out against it. I think we relied on Jenna Griswold to do that as a party, and she did a marvelous job. And I would work with Jenna, who's a friend of mine, in that situation to articulate a message that was based on the facts of the way we vote in Colorado, and that would go directly at the accusations that people are making about election process and speaking publicly about why they're wrong. I also want to say that I have the misfortune of knowing one of those candidates fairly well because he's my neighbor. He lives down the road from me about 1.5 miles. That's Senator Kevin Lundberg. And I'm very concerned lest Senator Lundberg actually win that seat because Senator Lundberg has spent his life in public relations and communications. And he's a very, very slippery, slick guy. I've watched him destroy Democratic candidates in forums and debates with the flick of a finger. And so I am really hoping it's somebody other than Kevin, but I also get kind of a laugh out of the fact that 2 of the candidates running for state party chair on the Democratic and Republican side are both coming from Berthoud, which prior to this year was kind of a no place in state politics.
And I have one more question. It's another one from Larry. And let me find it. Hold on. Oh, here we go. Sorry, I apologize. A lot of chat going on. What would you be able to do to assist the CD3 candidate against Boebert in 2024?
Okay. I had not known Adam prior to the beginning of this year. I watched him from afar. I donated some money to the extent that I could to support his race. And I was impressed by what I saw from a distance. Since January, I've had a couple of different conversations with him, one at the governor's ball, and then 2 other private conversations by Zoom. And I've gotten to know him a little bit better and feel like he's somebody I can work with closely. And I think he feels the same way. I think he also is pleased at the fact that I'm spending a lot of effort trying to get to know people in CD3. And it's a long way from my neck of the woods here in Colorado. But I did do a trip out to the Western Slope last weekend. I'm planning a trip out to the Four Corners area in March. And I was down in Pueblo once already and will be down there again. I think I would work alongside Adam, but probably more quietly than visibly. Because I know that seeing the Democratic Party chair standing right next to a candidate in CD3 may not be the best thing for him. If he wants me to, I will, and be out there publicly. If he wants me to play a more behind the scenes role and help support by encouraging the donors who are maxing out to our party to make sure that they're maxing out for him, by encouraging volunteers, particularly young people who are feeling that their county parties are gatekeeping them and not really letting them get involved. I'd want to deploy a force of young people either on phones or text messaging to sort of flush ground for you all in CD3, because we've got a lot of young people who just feel they're not really being given a role in their local party, and they have energy and they want to deploy it. So let's put it in CD3 to help out.
Well, thank you. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Debbie Burnett out of Gunnison has also declared her candidacy for Congressional District 3.
Okay.
So just to let you know, but thank you for that answer. Very much appreciated. So at this point, I believe we're out of questions that have been submitted by attendees. I personally, well, on behalf of all of the county chairs and the attendees and myself, I'd like to thank you for the time that you've given us today and for running. It's no easy feat to do that statewide. So we appreciate your dedication to the Colorado Democratic Party. We have about 6 minutes left if you want to offer some closing remarks or what have you.
Okay. So I'll start by saying that if I haven't talked to you yet, I know I've reached out by text. I'd love to talk. I'm texting because I do respect people's time. I don't think just calling you while you're at the grocery store or watching TV at home is appropriate. So I'd love to schedule a half hour or 45 minutes that we could talk in depth. And my phone number, if you've got a pen ready, is 720-219-0268. And you can also reach out to me via my website. I want to close by sharing a story from a conversation I had with a Democrat in Broomfield County last week, I think it was, that I talked to her, that really touched me in a way that gets to the core of what it means to be Democrats. This woman is in her 70s. She's retired. Her father was a World War II veteran with PTSD, left the family due to mental health issues. Her mother raised the kids in an apartment in Commerce City for a while, and then finally managed to scrape together the money to buy a nice little suburban house in Broomfield as it was developing as a suburb of Denver. That woman then went on to take over that house when her mother passed and raised her two daughters to go on and be lawyers in that from that house through our public schools, which I'm a staunch defender of. But now her neighborhood is being taken over by real estate investment trusts that are buying up the houses as the old members of the neighborhood move on or pass away. And she's finding that everything that she and her family worked for the last 50 or 60 years is basically being washed away by pro-growth and development policies coming oftentimes from our own party. I think that story is really important because it asks us to really think about what are our values as Democrats. We were sold a bill of goods in the 1980s by the Reagan administration that the American dream was not just doing a little bit better than our parents, but that it was somehow becoming fabulously wealthy overnight by some sort of strange system that nobody's really understood called trickle-down economics. And as those folks continue to grab up real estate, they continue to hoard corporate wealth, they continue to treat money as free speech, we find ourselves making the same arguments because the center of American politics has moved into the right wing. And we find ourselves leaving hardworking families like this woman in Broomfield in a neighborhood that was her American dream, that was a sign that she had made it better than her own family, that is being destroyed by real estate developers who are just interested in that get-rich-quick scheme. I think as Democrats, we have to take a stand against that kind of stuff. I think it's really important that we recognize that we are the party of the people and for the people, and the majority of the people are not going to be billionaires or millionaires because of their small business or their law firm or teaching job. We need to remember that we are a party that makes sure that people can move ahead gradually, and that there's respect for that in American politics, as opposed to only respect for those who have raised large sums of money in their personal fortunes. When I taught Homeland Security at the University of Denver, many of my students always said they'd rather be lucky than good. And I think that reflects this era that we live in, where people would rather be lucky and luck into a fortune than be good people who work hard, pay their bills, and raise their kids to be better people than they were. So as chair of a Democratic Party, those 5 values that I enumerated, I think are key to what I see as a vision for our future. And I want to make sure that when we say Dems deliver, we really mean that Dems deliver for all Coloradans, not just suburban Coloradans or urban Coloradans, but for rural Coloradans and for the pockets of the poor that live in our major urban areas who are also disaffiliating because they honestly don't believe that we are delivering for them. So thank you for your time, CD3 chairs. I look forward to the chance to work with you in the future after April 1st. And I look forward to visiting with some of you down in the Southwest when I work out exactly what my plans will be for mid to late March. Enjoyed the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. Again, we appreciate your time. And I will ask that you log out before we head into our next interview, just to be fair.
Sure, I got to go cook dinner before my wife gets home, right?
Right.
So there's going to be trouble. So
there you
thanks so
go.
much. You all have a great night and stay warm.
All right. Thanks, Tim.
Bye-bye.
Bye.